Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to Charlie Mike, hosted by me, Mike Buchanan. Hey, listen, today, I know we've been on this whole trail of mental health because last month was Mental Illness Awareness Month, right? And now it's PTSD Awareness Month. And so, I'm a big proponent of mental health. If you watch this podcast, which hopefully you do, and if you do, please subscribe and comment down below for the love of God. No one comments. I don't know why. You can even leave bad comments. I had someone leave a bad comment on one of the things, and I loved it. I literally was the first person to like it. So, I'm a big proponent of mental health, and so today we're going to be talking to the PTSD trauma. Well, no, I don't want to say PTSD. Hold on, I'm going to take that back. I don't want to say PTSD. It's the trauma clinic because trauma can come in many forms. Yes. That's what I've learned so far from talking to these wonderful people over here that you will get to meet. So let's get started. Why don't we take a moment so that you can introduce yourselves so that I don't have to remember two names.
Yeah, I can go first.
Okay.
So I'm Dr. Julia Evans. I'm a psychologist in the mental health trauma clinic at the Dallas VA. We're both partners in crime there. And so in my role, I work with veterans who are struggling with both PTSD and substance use, and we can talk a little bit more about why there's a specific position for that. Every VA actually has a position designated for that purpose, just because it is more prevalent than in the community. So I started in the VA in training as a practicum student, internship, and then postdoc. Didn't know what I was getting into at first.
Yeah.
It was just a training opportunity, but I really loved it. It was really rewarding work. It was my opportunity to serve those who served us. I kind of think of it like my service branch, if you will. So it's been a really great place, and that's why I've stayed so long. And there's just a lot of great opportunities for us to grow and for veterans to grow. So I think it's been rewarding so far.
Awesome. How do you follow that? Good luck.
I was going to say, I was like, okay, I'm following that.
She trumped you.
That's what I do.
It's all good.
You're welcome.
Yeah. No, so I'm Dr. Alexis Arevalo. Dr. A is perfectly fine. Basically, yeah, same thing, staff psychologist over there at the Mental Health Trauma Clinic. And so basically my role over there is I'm kind of a hybrid. I work with folks who've had past combat experience, but also who've had either MST or sexual abuse or assault. And so that's kind of my niche. Similarly, as Dr. Evans, I also started as a practicum student at the Lubbock VA, way over there.
Yeah, in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of
nowhere. In the desert, yes.
Yeah, and then moved into the Dallas VA as an intern, then fellow, and then I've been over here.
Sweet. So both of you are not veterans?
No.
I'm not.
Did you have veterans in your family?
I did. Or do.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I didn't put the pieces together when I started working at the VA. I didn't realize. I think being in the VA has helped me understand family members better, but that wasn't the original drive.
Yeah. I always just like to ask, just because I always like to kind of see like how it all came to be,
Yeah.
I do know that the VA is a great place to work. Typically a great place to work. Let's just be honest, because this is a very honest podcast. So I always tell people I'm very 60-40. I'm 60-40 pro VA.
Hey.
Yes, but the VA only gets 60% of my love because that's all they've ever earned, right? No, I'm just kidding. They do really good stuff. I mean, we do good things, and we have good people work for us. But I was just telling someone out in the hallway just a second ago. Unlike any other organization, when you get so big, you can only manage so much.
Yeah.
I mean, and so you're going to be salt and peppered on employees that love what they do, which obviously it seems like you both do. Because you both seem to be in high spirits about it. And then you get some that are just like checking a box. They're just like, please don't talk to me. I just want to do my work. I want to go home. Right. And so, yeah, it is what it is. Anyway, so thanks for being on today. I appreciate it. Not many people love to be on here. But you two, obviously, well, you did not want to. I think you're still apprehensive about being here.
Yes. Public speaking is not my forte, but I'm just trying to do something that's important.
So I don't want to worry you, but this isn't really public speaking. Consider it more like international speaking.
Oh, that helps.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Quieres que hable en español, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, by all means, yes. Because it's going out on YouTube. So really the whole world, if they looked up Charlie Mike, could see you.
Yeah.
So
we're not going to think
congratulations.
about that right now.
This is your world debut. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the trauma clinic, right? So let's talk about kind of what it is. And you've already kind of touched on what you both kind of specialize in, but let's just talk about what the trauma clinic is and how it may differ from the other clinics at the mental health department.
You want to take this one?
Yeah. So yeah, with the trauma clinic, it's one of like the sub main clinics. So you got your different teams where it's like some for elderly veterans, some that just specialize primarily with folks who have substance use. And then we also have the trauma clinic. There's other clinics, but I'm not going to go too much into it. But yeah, in our clinic, we specialize folks who've gone through a trauma, and specifically that's like the care that they're needing. That's like the focus. Doesn't mean that people don't come in here with other things that they're also struggling with, but that's their primary focus at the jump. And so depending on what's going on, there's different specialty folks. So like Dr. Evans was mentioning, she'll focus a lot with folks who have PTSD and who also have a combination of substance use, and folks who might come in my side who have more of the combat experience or have a military sexual trauma or something like that. So they kind of get tailored to what fits best for them in the clinic. But again, they can come in with a lot of different things, but that's the primary focus is there's been a trauma at some point for that person's life.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll add that anywhere you go in the VA mental health wise, there's going to be someone who's trained to treat PTSD. We're just more specialty focused. If someone's wanting to work on that 100%, they get referred to us.
Yeah, I say it way more layman's terms, and it may not even be correct, but this is how I kind of like talk about the trauma clinic whenever I'm out in the community. Is I always say, listen, our mental health field can take care of whatever it is that you have going on. But someone will be like, well, I have PTSD, I should be in the trauma clinic. Why? Right? So like, because like it doesn't mean just because you have PTSD doesn't mean that you're not managing it kind of well, right? So you may not necessarily need some deep dive into whatever the trauma was. Like for me, like I went inpatient already. So like I probably don't need the trauma clinic, but like what if I did have some like underlying trauma that kind of came to the surface one day, then maybe I need the trauma clinic. So I consider it like more fine-tuned kind of like surgical approach. And that's kind of how I explain it in the field, I guess, to other veterans. It's a more fine-tuned surgical approach to your mental health problem. Is that?
I like that.
No,
Yeah,
I would say
makes
yes.
sense.
Sweet.
Yeah.
You heard it here.
You did
Way
it.
to go.
I'm a genius. I'm a genius. Yeah, well, that's one of these days. I'm going to be like a GS Infinity and I'm going to run mental health. Just kidding. I'll never have a doctorate. So
You'll be our boss.
I'll never be able to be in charge without a doctorate. So that will never happen. But maybe someone will let me like kind of like, come along on their curtails.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love that.
You can go behind Dr. Evans' curtails.
So whenever
she rises into the
whenever you rise
Okay.
to power, you just let me know, and then I'll be like your PR person.
Okay.
Yeah, like your chief of staff.
Okay.
That kind of thing. I'll just
I
be
like
like,
how we're building
no,
my
we should do this, not this. And then you're like,
Gotcha.
yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that.
Hey.
Yeah.
That'd be great. I would love that job. All right. So we did talk about this just a little bit, but so the trauma clinic obviously deals with more than just PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people just think that whenever they think about veterans and they think of trauma, they're always go to PTSD. Honestly, it annoys the crap out of me as a veteran. Like it really annoys the crap out of me because PTSD is something that some of us were dealing with, but honestly, most of us that were in like post 9/11 service, we were just kind of blanket statement with PTSD, kind of like when we were getting out, because they were like, we really don't know what to say about you. We just know that you have issues because of war or because you have multiple compounding issues from other, like at home, and then you came to war kind of things. And so they blanket statement, you have PTSD. And I hate that. I hate it because now as like we get further and further along in the whole studies and how mental health is kind of ever evolving because it's a practice. Not many people understand that, but mental health, the field is you practice in the field. That's why they call it a mental health practice, is because you're consistently learning and growing and doing things differently. Okay. I wish I should play that. I should play that sound thing. See, like, watch, just learn something.
The more you know.
Yeah.
You need the reading rainbow.
Yes,
Yeah.
the more you know, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why it's called a practice. But like when I got out of the military, I was like, okay, I got tagged with PTSD.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, PTSD. So I looked into it and I was like, I have a lot of these symptoms, but I don't necessarily have a ton of these symptoms. But then like as it progressed, then we started talking more about like moral injury and things like that. And I was like, ooh, that's me, right? Like I could self-diagnose myself in a second with moral injury, and PTSD, I was kind of like on the fence. I was like, maybe, yeah. I mean, I kind of, maybe sometimes, but like, yeah, moral injury though, that's my jam. that's definitely my jam. So that being said, there's obviously more traumas out there, right, than just PTSD. So can we kind of cover maybe some more of the different types of traumas? That way, like maybe people out there can kind of get a gist of trauma is an ever-growing spectrum.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because trauma, a lot of people go through trauma in their life, not just veterans. And not everybody develops PTSD. Not everyone develops a mental health condition from it. A lot of people recover naturally. There's a lot of resilience that we don't talk about. So the people who go through like Hurricane Katrina and they're able to come back from that with no PTSD, or the veterans who've gone through combat and they're able to find a way to make sense of what happened and not develop PTSD. So that's only one outcome is PTSD, and kind of think of it as a disorder of impeded recovery. So there's something that happened that got them stuck in making sense of that trauma. So that can be one outcome, PTSD. Depression can be an outcome, an anxiety disorder, bipolar. There's so many different ways it can look. So when someone comes to our clinic, we do a very thorough assessment saying, is PTSD part of this picture or is it something else? And so if we need to target something else that the trauma has brought up, then we will. Maybe there is moral injury. But that doesn't mean there's also PTSD. Sometimes there's both. Sometimes there's just one. So we really have to take it on a case-by-case basis.
This is very eloquent.
Yeah.
You're an eloquent person.
Yeah.
I'm going to add, and we'll see if I go as eloquently.
It's not going to be as eloquent. Just warning you.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just going to add that. Yeah. Actually, literally like 2 days ago, we had a huge workshop on racial trauma. And so we can also talk about like the cumulative aggregative of folks who've had racial discrimination and how that can add up and also cause trauma-related responses as well, like feeling like they can't trust people, feeling on edge, very vigilant as to who they can trust and can't. So again, it doesn't always have to look like what stereotypically is out there of like just combat, and that's the only way I could ever have PTSD, because it can come from a lot of different things too.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting that you say that. There's when I first was having issues in the military, and then I was like, okay, I need to do something about it, right? Like everyone was screaming at me to do something about it, and finally, when I realized that it was probably I was gonna wind up a statistic most likely, right? So then I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's time. So then I picked an inpatient program, and I actually got sent here to Texas. I was actually from upstate New York. I was stationed at Fort Drum, New York. I was 10th Mountain Division. Yep, climb to glory. So what they sent me, or actually I begged to come down here to Denton, actually, and I went to UBH in Denton. So they had a program called Freedom Care a long time ago, and so I went there. And then I got care there for like 5 weeks. Well, it's supposed to be a 4-week program, but by the time that I got my 4 weeks in, and I was like doing like, I was like in the throes of the program. Yeah. The 5th week was more like to sew me back up, because like every time someone would say something to me, I'd be so sensitive, I would like cry. And so they were like, you need an extra week to simmer. Yeah. Right. But when I went there, I worked on a lot of different things, and I mean, like it was really good, but I guess I got to learn more about myself and more traumas that I had actually experienced that I didn't even like think that were traumas. Yeah. Because I got more trauma education through trauma class, right? Yeah. So, I went in there thinking, oh, I have trauma from war. And so then we started talking about all my war stuff, and then deeper things started kind of uprooting, and then I started realizing that like trauma is far more complex than I could have ever imagined, right? It's like if you watch like Top Chef and they do like the micro layers of like food, and there's like all these little tiny layers of stuff. I'm like, this is what it's like. And like each layer is like a different flavor. It's like crazy. It's so weird. Yeah. And so I guess that's one of the things that I always try to let veterans know is that like, just because you think that you have it covered now does not mean that you're going to have it covered forever. Because trauma has multiple layers to it, and you're just literally burning through a layer right now. And then eventually you're going to get to the next one and the next one, and you'll figure more out. Because like I figured out that I had a sort of sexual trauma when I was a kid. I had all sorts of physical trauma when I was younger, when I was, my stepfather was pretty bad. So like I had all these things going on, right? It was impeding on the combat trauma too. And so like, I never realized that, but now, I mean, now that you guys say that, yeah, it's you guys have to treat a lot, honestly. Hey, my hat's off to you. I would take it off, but I have headphones. But hats off to you, because like it's got to be complicated. Yeah,
thank you for sharing that, because a lot of veterans come in with trauma from childhood, and then they go through trauma in the military, and then even trauma after. Yeah. So it's really cumulative, those effects over time, and we have to target the one at that moment kind of it's the most distressing to them. Mm-hmm. And we hope that that'll trickle down to the others, but sometimes we may need to target the others.
Yeah, sometimes when you're doing trauma-focused treatment and you hit kind of like Dr. Evans was mentioning, the biggest one that's bothering them, if they're very thematically related to past traumas, it usually actually, by hitting that big one, it actually recovers with the other ones too. But if there's like a very different in theme, like one's a sexual trauma and one's a combat trauma, you might be able to recover from one, and the other one might not be as affected because they're just so thematically different. So then you might have to transition into tackle this other one as well.
Yeah, you're talking about stuck points now. See, I'm trained.
Oh, I see it.
I'm trained. Yeah, I'm trained in CPT.
Hey.
So yeah, I don't have very many stuck points left.
Awesome.
Yeah, I started with, it's crazy. So I started with 147 stuck points.
Wow, you counted.
Well, they made us because we had to put it on a board. Like, so that was part of the process. I had to write it all down on a piece of paper, and then I had to put it all on a board at the beginning of like trauma group or whatever. We had to put it all on a board, and everyone had to see all of our stuck points. And then they had to go through, and we had to count every single one of them, right? And then we had to kind of keep a tally of it. And then at the end, we put them all back up there again. And then you do either a full change, some change, or no change.
That's really cool. I haven't done it like
Yeah. Oh no, your microphone died again.
Womp, womp.
It's okay. It's okay. We'll get it fixed. Give me a sec. Hang on. All right. Sorry about that. We had to take a rough cut because I had to do some technical difficulty things. We ran out of batteries. We're the government. What can I say? It happens. It happens. Her microphone ran out of batteries, so we had to kind of make a rough cut. My apologies, but hey, we're back. So we were talking about stuck points, right? And so I was talking about how I had like 147 of them. So yeah, we had to do some change, no change, full change, whatever, right? And so I wound up with like, I think like maybe 4 that I wouldn't change.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah, it was really good. I mean, good for me, bad for the people that are still on my won't change list, who I still consistently hate, Mom. So, I mean, it's bad for those people, but it's great for me. But yeah, I mean, I thought that was really cool. I think, I talk to people all the time about going to inpatient, and, I talk to you about this, but I always say this because I want it to be heard by as many people as possible, but I equate mental health to kind of like cancer, right? And so I always tell people, like, listen, the way that you treat cancer is the way that you're supposed to treat mental health. People don't think that that's the case. They think that, okay, I have really bad mental health symptoms right now, or really bad mental health problems right now, so I just need to go see an outpatient therapist. Probably not, right? Like, if your symptoms are really that bad, like I tell my kids all the time this, I say, there's a difference between a problem, an issue, and a problem, right? There's a difference, an issue and a problem. And I said, you need to identify if it's an issue or a problem. A problem, when it gets to a problem, you need to fix it, or you need to allow other people to help you fix it, right? But if it's an issue, then you need to try to fix it on your own, right? Like, it's not to that state where it needs to get fixed yet. And I tell them that the difference between the issue and a problem is that an issue affects just you, and a problem affects others. Right? So like, think about it. Like, if I drink 3 beers a night, okay, and I wake up just fine, and I go to work, and then I come home, and then I drink 3 more beers, okay, do I have an issue? Maybe. Okay, maybe, because I drink beer every single night. Okay, so I may have an issue. Is it a problem? It's probably not a problem. Right? Does that make sense? Does that equate? That's how I think about it. And it may not be right.
Yeah,
and you may not be able to agree with it. You may
Yeah.
not be allowed to agree with that. But that's kind of what I tell people.
Yeah, the way we think about it is in terms of distress and impairment. So if it's bothering you, even if other people aren't seeing the effects, then I think that's enough to come in and get some kind of work for it. Or if it's impairing you at work, your relationships, and I think those are the biggest ones, work, relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say those are the biggest ones.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I always say it like that is because veterans are always like, wow, it's not that big of a deal. And I'm just like, well, your wife just told me a story who I just met today, so I think that it's a problem. Yeah. Like, I think it's reached that problem point, right? Like, here's the issue, here's the problem. And so those kinds of, and I'm like, okay, if it's reached the problem point, you might go get some help. So that being said, why don't we talk about some of the symptoms of PTSD, since we are trying to raise awareness about PTSD. So let's talk about what can some of the symptoms be? Yeah,
at kind of the general level, PTSD has like 4 different clusters. So the first cluster is really when someone is re-experiencing their trauma. It could have been a month ago, it could have been 5 years ago, but that individual is still re-experiencing that event as if it was happening again. So for them, it might be physical, like there could have been a cue, and then all of a sudden they feel a ton of guilt or a ton of anxiety. I mentioned the guilt because a lot of people think it's always anxiety. It can sometimes be guilt. It can sometimes be anger.
Sadness.
It can be sadness. Yeah.
Every time Taps plays, I literally lose my, you know what? Like I just lose it. Like it's almost like autonomic response. Like it's just instantaneous. Like I just lose it.
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes it's a very physical or emotional process. And so for some, it's more of like nightmares and the flashbacks that you hear about. At the second kind of cluster, that's really usually what maintains PTSD is the avoidance of it, of any emotions that are related to it or anything external in the world that reminds you of it. It's like, oh, I will never go to a grocery store because it's too crowded and it reminds me of this one event. Okay, so that's that second cluster, avoidance. And like I mentioned, I'm highlighting that one because that's actually what most of the time gets in the way of recovery, is that someone is just trying to avoid any emotions or that process that needs to happen. But it makes a ton of sense, though. It's like you're talking about a trauma, something that's very difficult to talk about. It's not just any type of memory. So it can be very difficult to go underdo that. But that's why most of the trauma-focused treatments are to go against that second cluster. The third cluster really is just more of like how you think and how you end up behaving or emotionally changes afterwards. So for some people, they forget a lot of the important parts of that memory or that time period. They have gaps in it. For other folks, it's more of their thought process changed or it's gotten worse. So if someone has a trauma prior to this one that happens in the military, they might have started thinking, oh, like I kind of don't trust people, but I think people are kind of trustworthy. Then another trauma happens. It's like, boom, that one just got really solidified of like, now I really don't believe I can trust people.
Yeah, it reinforces the stuck point.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of the third cluster. And then the last one is just more of like, body-wise, physiologically, you're in this fight or flight mode, and it's really hard to turn off for folks who have PTSD. So they might mention, I'm having a lot of issues with sleeping, or I feel on edge all the time, and I feel like I'm in a place I should be able to relax. And then there's this issues with concentrating. So a lot of the times when folks have PTSD, they'll start talking about with folks of like, I think I have a memory issue. Or they'll mention, I think I have ADHD. And it's really usually not those things. It's just that PTSD can cause concentration issues. And so it might be more of what you're dealing with inside is causing you to not be able to attend as much as you could. And by not being able to attend to things, you also can't recall things. If someone's talking to you, but you hear nothing of it, of course you're not going to remember it later on. It's not because you had a memory issue. It's because you were having an attention issue at that time.
Well, I need to go see a mental health professional.
Yeah.
That's what I just learned right now. Dang it. Okay, well, great. Thanks,
I
guys.
To piggyback off that, though, what you were talking about with people who are like, I don't have a problem, that could be part of that avoidance.
Yes.
Like, I don't want to look inward enough to figure out there's something bothering me. And so I think avoidance is the biggest thing that keeps people from coming in, whether it's denying that there's a problem or they just don't want to come to the VA at all because the VA is a trigger because it makes them think of their military time. So we're really trying to target the thing that's keeping them out of treatment, which can be really difficult if they're not there in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes people need that higher level of care, like you were mentioning, with like residential programs where they're stuck somewhere and they cannot avoid because it's where they're going to be.
Super good.
Yeah.
Super helpful.
Yeah.
Super helpful.
And I just wanted to add real quick is that if someone is ever talking to someone else who has PTSD and they believe they might have it, yours does not have to look like everyone else's other's PTSD. PTSD looks very different depending on the individual because the individual has so many identities, gender, how they grew up as a child, what branch in the service they were, how high in rank they were. All of those things really impact how someone's PTSD ends up looking like. So for examples, a female African-American's PTSD with a sexual assault might be looking different towards a man who's a Latino and how their PTSD ends up looking. There's going to be variations to how that presents and how the avoidance also presents. So I just thought I wanted to bring that up there.
Yeah, we learned that in trauma class, but everyone's trauma is very, very different based on there's so many factors to consider, right? Like there's the factor of like, how were you raised as a child? How much resilience have you been trained with? How much resilience did you have to grow up with? Because did you grow up in if like those of us who grew up in a worse household, right? Let's just say, right? Like we either sink or we swim. So that's kind of how it works, right? Like you sink or swim in an abusive household. So like I grew up in a very abusive household. So I either had to sink or swim. Some days I was swimming, right? I mean, I was doing really good and I was quick to avoid things, and I was quick to kind of read the room, and I was like, not the day, you know, and then I'm gonna go stay somewhere else kind of thing. And then some days were sink days, right? And so but it builds resilience over time. And but you know, if you live in a household where you're sheltered all the time, where someone takes care of everything all the time, and like your resilience is very low, right? So then when you do experience the world for the first time, the gory, bloody truth of the world, it's jarring, right? That's why I always tell veterans, like, listen, just because you don't think that your experiences validate you having PTSD doesn't mean that it isn't PTSD, right? I mean, like, for instance, my wife, right? I tell her all the time, like, you have PTSD. She says, no, I don't. And I said, listen, I've left you multiple times. I've had multiple mental health episodes at the house, right? I've jarred you 1,000 different ways from 1,000 different directions, right? And I said, you have all of these symptoms. I said, you have all the same symptoms that I had when I came back from war. You never even went. And she's like, yeah, but I never went to war. You don't have to go to war to experience some sort of trauma that lingers with you that can cause these stuck points, right? Or these places that these hurdles you just can't seem to jump over, right? I mean, it doesn't, I don't know. I think that that's the greatest thing that if I could tell anybody anything about PTSD is like your 7 on your pain scale could be someone else's 2 on their pain scale, right? But then vice versa, you know, like your 2 on your pain scale could be someone else's 7. And so you don't ever know. And it affects people differently based on their backgrounds. Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
Do you mind if I just add one little quick
Sure.
thing? Yeah.
Yes, I mind. Stop talking. How dare you talk on a podcast?
This is a great show.
How dare you?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that sometimes folks get really fixated on the diagnosis of PTSD. And so one of the things is that folks can still have a trauma stressor disorder. That is what PTSD is under. And so if you ever see a clinician and they say, you know, I think you have a trauma stressor disorder, but not a PTSD, that's actually not a terrible thing to be hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
One, it could mean that your symptoms are there. They're still bothering you. But, you know, at a different level. Or 2, it could mean there's just a couple of symptoms that you're not having that fully meets for that criteria. And that's not a bad thing, again, because it means you're having lesser symptoms than someone who would have PTSD, but you would still probably get the same type of treatment that someone who has PTSD would too. Just because you have a trauma stressor disorder that's not specifically PTSD does not mean you would not get the same type of care because of it. You're still having the same type of responses.
Yeah, I mean, well said. I think that for veterans, it's really difficult for that because, you know, disability.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, disability plays a huge factor. The VA does the government in general, because they run the VA. The government in general does a really crappy job about keeping us sick, right? Because, like, we promote sickness, not wellness. Like, I keep trying to tell people, like, we should get, like, an extra pay at the end of the year if we go and see, like, a certain amount of, like, appointments per year or whatever. You know, like, if we sought, I don't know, 3 or 4 appointments with the VA and we got seen twice for each of our things that we're service connected for or whatever in that year, then we get like a $500 bonus at the end of the year. So it's just something to like promote wellness, right? Just to promote, like, go and get checkups, go and talk to someone, go and just say hi, right? And go and just check in, because we don't do that. We just don't. And so then when it comes down to it, people want to have that diagnosis because they want to have that disability, because they want to have the disability pay. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and it can be very validating. Like,
yes,
to say that I have PTSD, it's you're honoring what I've gone through, and we can honor that in different ways. It doesn't have to be that diagnosis.
Exactly, and that's the other side of the coin, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you have one side of the coin who may be trying to get that diagnosis so that they can get that disability, right? And then the other side of the coin is trying to get that diagnosis so that they don't feel crazy.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Because I know, like, for me, that's what it was. For me, like, I didn't necessarily want the diagnosis at all, but when I did get diagnosed, I was like, oh, thank God. Like, there's at least something to call this. So now I can go and, like, do research. I can go and, like, fix it. I can go and do something about it, right? Because, like, it's kind of like trying to fight an enemy that you don't know exists.
Right.
Like an invisible enemy. Like, how do you fight an invisible enemy? But now if you put a name to it, right? Like fighting a demon. Like you got to know its name first, right? You know, like you're like, tell me your name.
Yes. You have to see it for what it is.
That's
before
right.
You can treat it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You got to see it for what it is before you can treat it. And so, yeah, I mean, I do think, but there's multiple sides to that coin, and you never know which veteran you're going to run into, and you never know which person you're going to run into, and like which side of the coin that they're really on. But you have to take them all seriously, right? I mean, that's kind of what we have to do at the VA. We have to take all of them as serious as possible.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about this. We've already talked a little bit about some of the different modalities of treatment and options because we're kind of running out of time. So let's just get to this. Let's just get to how can veterans inquire, I guess, about the trauma clinic or just about getting help for their traumas?
I want to
PTSD.
first give a plug for the About Face website. So if someone is very hesitant about anything, they can just go to this website and look at the different treatments available, how other veterans have experienced it, and then they can kind of see, is this something I want to pursue? And then from there, they can call the primary care mental health team, and they'll screen them, kind of assign them to a team. They may get assigned to us, they may not, but if PTSD is what they want to treat, like we said, they can be treated in a lot of different ways, different clinics.
Okay. Yeah, well said. What was I going to say? Oh, dang. Oh, I was going to say you plugged a website. Yeah, I'm also going to plug a website. So you can also go to Coaching into Care. So if you're not a veteran or your family member or a friend or a neighbor or whatever, okay, you can go to Coaching into Care. You just Google it. You'll find it. I promise. It's a gov.gov website. So go to Coaching into Care. And what it was is it's a website that was developed originally by the VA to help people who were concerned about veterans talk to them about getting treatment. So like, you know, like my spouse, my wife could go, oh, I think he needs to go see someone. Okay. But like he is very resilient about it and I can't get him to really talk about it. And so there's a whole website that's developed to do that. And then there's also like coaches that you can call, like you can call a number and then they'll like actually coach you. To like say, well, okay, don't say that because then that's like, you know, like then you're just like, you're kind of like making him feel guilty or whatever, but maybe say this, you know, maybe this will sway the conversation a different way, which is great. It's a whole team of master manipulators on the end of a phone line.
That's one way to put it. Yeah.
That's what I call all of you psychiatrists and doctor sorts in mental health. I call you all master manipulators.
Great.
Awesome. You're welcome.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
You're welcome. Well, you really are. I mean, if you really think about it, you are a I mean, that's your job, but just do it for good and not use it for evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do it for good, I hope.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a lot of power to have.
Yes, it is. It's a very vulnerable place to come to talk to us. And
It is.
We want to recognize that. Like coming is such a big act of courage.
It's a huge act of courage. Yeah, we've had a discussion. I'll cover this real quick, but we had a discussion on here not too long ago about whether providers like yourselves, right, should seek mental health care themselves. Listen, I know that it's a contentious topic amongst providers. I know that because I always tell people it's like the chicken or the egg, right? You know, conversation, or it's nature versus nurture. It's the very similar conversation because some people are full into like nature develops a psychopath, right? Or nurture develops a psychopath. And so it's the same kind of way. Like some of the providers like, nope, I think, you know, self-care is extremely important and why you shouldn't do it without self-care. And some people are like, nah. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say we have an ethical imperative for self-care. So that can look different for everybody. Some people it is going to therapy, or some people it's having good social support. So I think it is true that we as providers need to take care of ourselves, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. And again, kind of coming back to something Dr. Evans had mentioned earlier is, you know, is it causing distress? Is it causing issues for the provider themselves? In that case, that's kind of a reality check of like, hey, you probably need some therapy if those two things are happening for you now.
The reason I mention it is because as a veteran, like that's one of my fears, right? One of my fears is like, okay, I don't trust a lot of people. I mean, normally we don't trust anybody. Right. We trusted the unit that we were with because we were deployed with them and we had to fight with them. And so like if they were good enough to keep me alive in a firefight, then they're good enough to trust out in the world. But the thing is like I don't know any of you from Adam, right? And so like I am not going to trust you right out of the gate. And there's a lot of providers that I don't sync with. And same with other veterans. They're not going to sync with every provider that they're given. And so veterans out there need to realize that like they don't have to sync with their provider, that they can get another provider, they can choose another provider. Don't stop coming just because you don't like your provider. That is so dumb. Yeah. Okay, let's go find another provider. Like, it's like a simple form that you fill out and you have to give a reason. You're just like, because I don't like them. So, I mean, it's real easy. Like, one person looked like my mom. I was like, she looks like my mom. And I literally wrote that on a piece of paper. I was like, I can't do this. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, they need to know that. And then they also need to be able to trust you too. And I think that it's important to kind of start building that trust. And so I always ask the question. That's why I had to bring it up. I always ask that because I want people to know that they can do that too. I used to tell people as a peer support specialist when I was talking to veterans, I say you should interview your therapist before they start doing therapy. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I said, you interview them like they're getting a job with you, because really they are, right? Like, they're about to tackle some of your most horrible, nightmarish, embarrassing things that you've ever done in your life, right? And they're about to just get like full access to that. So like you wouldn't want to like interview that person first. And so I used to give them interview questions. I used to be like, do you seek care yourself? What do you do for self-care if you don't seek care? I know it's intrusive, but I've created an army of intrusive people out there somewhere.
I think you're getting more.
Yeah.
I just think it's important. You don't think it's important to kind of interview? I mean, if you were going to pick your own doctor, would you do it?
I may not ask specifically about therapy themselves,
Yes.
so I think that's a very personal matter, but I think I would ask them like their perspectives on certain things, see how they answer questions. I would also look for things like, do they show up on time? Do they seem to be listening? Those kinds of things help me build trust. If I can look at these nonverbals and things they're saying and then go from there before I make a decision.
Good tips.
Yeah, I think the nonverbals is usually how I usually determine folks, do they feel like, am I tense being in the room with this person? Or do I actually feel comfortable? Do I feel like I can kind of like let go of my spine a little bit,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And there are things that we do to try to put people at ease. I'm going to mess that up. Pause that. There are things that we try to do to put people at ease.
She's like, cut. She's like, cut. Cut, full stop. No, I'm not cutting it.
This is an example. We are human ourselves. We are going to make mistakes. And that can be hard when you're trying to trust someone. We will make mistakes at times.
Yes.
But I think how we own our mistakes can be a good example of how you might be able to do that yourself.
Yeah. I always find that it's important when we're talking about mental health, and especially VA mental health, because VA mental health has a really bad rap. It's not the greatest rap, right? I mean, some of you do. Some of our services have a really good rap, right? But a majority of the times it's not talked about in a great light. So always trying to bring better light to that and have veterans understand that the time that they have with the services that they're given or provided, right, is based upon how they decide to kind of go about getting that treatment, right, and interacting with those treatment modalities too. So like, veterans will come to me and they'll be like, well, this person was mean to me. Did you tell them that they were mean? Like, did you report that they were mean? Did you ask for another provider? Like, there's 1,000 other questions that I could ask, but like, did you do it? No, I just left. Why? Like, you did nothing to fix the problem. Now, like, that person not only is going to do it to somebody else, right? But like, now, like, you're going to not get help. And so like, it doesn't help anybody do that. So it's kind of more about raising that whole awareness. While you're raising awareness for mental illness, it's always important to raise awareness on like how to deal with services that you don't typically like, right?
Yeah, how to advocate for yourself.
Exactly.
That's something we teach people as well.
Yeah.
Because avoidance will tell you, just don't deal with it, just walk away.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? And that's a huge thing, especially if we're talking about PTSD today, right? Because like, if we're going to talk about PTSD awareness, then we have to talk about one of those symptoms is avoidance, right? And so that's a huge thing, is how can I avoid this treatment at all costs?
Yes.
And what excuse can I create? And give me a reason to create an excuse, please. Like, please give me this reason to create this excuse. And I don't know. I try to remove those barriers consistently as I talk to veterans throughout my journeys, throughout the outreach that we get to do as a team. So yeah, that's why I wanted to cover that. I know it was long-winded, but
That's good stuff.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, because like, we are a human being on the other side.
Yeah.
We take away the doctor title, like, I'm still person on the other side.
Yeah.
And we're in therapy, you're in a relationship. It's a therapeutic one, but it's still a relationship. So like, if you're trying to learn how to manage your relationships because you have PTSD or trauma symptoms outside, you have a person who you could potentially practice that with, who might be easier. There's nothing to lose there. And so if you have an issue with something a provider has said, or maybe the tone they used, being able to learn, how do I say that and say, hey, like you said this one thing this way, it came across as this way to me, provides the other person an opportunity to maybe explain what was going on. Yeah. And that's a valuable skill to learn how to do then later on in your own life. You know, if, you know, a spouse, a child, a grandparent says something to you and you're just like, I'm cutting you off. It's like, wait, let's actually learn, let's learn how to not do that.
Yeah. And then you'll be left with no one.
Yeah.
Well said. I usually just make inappropriate jokes. That's typically what I do when I'm like nervous or I'm like upset about something. I'll try to make an inappropriate joke.
Yeah. I'll bring something like that into the room. Like, I noticed you made a joke when we talked about this. Can we talk more about that? Yeah. I really like when these things happen in the moment because we can talk about them. If you get mad at me, then that's great. We can talk about that. We can practice how we would deal with this outside of here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's well said. Okay, well, that's pretty much all we got. Any lasting words? Oh, if you, I usually ask this question to everybody. So, well, not everyone. I forget a lot of times. I'm human. I make mistakes. So let me ask you this question real quick. Okay, so quickly. If you could tell veterans anything that you wanted to out there, what would you tell them? And go.
I would say that there's hope. Like, in the mindset that you're coming out of trauma, you may not believe there's hope of getting better, but there's always room to grow and there's recovery for everybody. It may look different. So just try to have a little bit of hope to get you through the door.
Yeah. For me, it would be very much on that. Recovery does not mean you're not going to fall back at times. And even if you do, it does not mean you need to give up and just be like, therapy's not working, I'm back where I kind of was. That actually is quite normal for that to happen. And so to just give yourself like some compassion and be like, you know what, today just was one of those days. I sank, you know, just happened. Okay, cool. Doesn't mean tomorrow's going to be that like that. Doesn't mean you have to have that mindset of tomorrow's going to be like that. It's just trying to go back to your skills and kind of moving forward and knowing that that's going to happen from time to time, you know?
Well said. Yeah, life works in a bell curve. Yeah, pretty much. It's just a consistent and continuous bell curve. Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, that's all we got for you today. Thank you so much to both of you for coming in here and talking to us about PTSD and trauma and about the trauma clinic. Listen, mental health, I cannot stress this enough. Mental health is extremely important. And if you're dealing with any kind of mental health issues, please go to the crisis line first and foremost, obviously, and then go get with your primary care mental health, not mental health, but primary care person, your doctor, and ask them about going to see mental health permanently. And then you can probably get into some sort of other treatment like the trauma clinic maybe. So, but that's it. That's all we got for you. And listen, no matter how bad things seem to be, just Charlie Mike.
Don't tread on me, just let me be. I believe what I believe. At least I got something left to stand for.